Hey, what's going on? Jeff Ratcliffe here. Fantasy football season is officially in full swing. It's draft time, baby, and that means we got to be looking at our fantasy football rankings. No doubt about it. So let's dive into the top 10 at wide receiver for 2019 fantasy football drafts. And I tell you what, there is a lot of depth at wide out this year. It's not like running back. You know, running back's going to thin out really quickly in your drafts, but you're going to be able to get some good wide receiver options well after the top 10 are off the board. But I know if you're anything like me, maybe you want a premium option as well. So let's dive into the top 10. We're going to go in reverse order. We'll go to number 10 first. And I have T.Y. Hilton coming in at number 10. Any given week, T.Y. Hilton could be the #1 fantasy receiver with Andrew Luck throwing him the ball with the downfield ability that he has and the big play upside. We've seen it, time in and time out with T.Y. Hilton that he has that major fantasy upside. Of course, he's not the most consistent option, but the ceiling more than makes up for the sometimes low weekly floor. What I like about the Colts as well is they bring in some help at wide receiver, so the attention should be off T.Y. a little bit. Of course, defenses are going to know where he is on the field, but when you have Devin Funchess on the field and Paris Campbell with his game-breaking speed, that'll help things out just a little bit. Take a little attention off for T.Y. Hilton. I like him as a top 10 option this year. At number 9, Mike Evans. I know for some reason there's a lot of fantasy players out there that love to hate this guy, but he has been awesome over the course of his career. He's played 5 seasons in the NFL. He's had 1,000 yards or more in all 5 of those years. That's really big time production right there. Not to mention the fact that he is one of the most heavily targeted wideouts in the red zone in the league. Last year, 16 end zone targets for Mike Evans. That is big time right there. The easiest way to score a touchdown in the NFL, and it is not easy to score a touchdown in the NFL, but the easiest way is to be targeted in the end zone. Evans sees a lot of those premium targets from Jameis Winston, and I think that only continues this year with Bruce Arians in at head coach. We know Evans is one of the more heavily targeted, X wideouts, wide receiver ones downfield as well, with an average depth of target of over 17 yards last year. He's a big play waiting to happen in addition to his target monster status. Love Mike Evans, have him at number 9. At number 8, Antonio Brown. Now, we normally would not have Antonio Brown this low in the rankings, and 8 is pretty darn high for most receivers. But this guy, he's been the fantasy GOAT for a better part of the last half-decade, well, even a little bit more than the last half-decade. And he's coming off a season where he obviously had 15 receiving touchdowns. He was a monster yet again last year, but, of course, he's no longer on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So you get a little bit of downgrade at quarterback, maybe even a little bit more than just a little bit, going from Ben Roethlisberger to Derek Carr. But I still like Antonio Brown as a rock-solid wide receiver 1 in fantasy, because I don't think there's really any competition for touches there, or targets, that is. Because think about it, Tyrell Williams not going to challenge him. Is it Hunter Renfrow in the slot, maybe the rookie? He's not going to challenge for targets. Jared Cook is out of the mix at tight end, so there's no real challenge for targets there. Antonio Brown's going to see a lot of volume. Now, he may not be, 15 touchdowns is an enormous number, but he may not even be a double-digit touchdown guy. I expect, 8, 9, 10 is certainly well within the range. But even with that, with heavy volume, he's going to be a wide receiver 1, no doubt about it. Of course, his former teammate comes in at number 7, Juju Smith-Schuster. Should benefit from AB being out of the mix, but they're different players. Juju, he certainly has the ability to play on the outside, but he also is going to kick to the slot a lot. We saw him last year. If you expect a big uptick in his targets, last year he already saw a lot. He was almost at 25% last year. So I wouldn't expect a huge uptick there, but a slight uptick. Certainly he's now the guy in Pittsburgh, and he's certainly, with that offense, with Ben Roethlisberger's big arm and the sheer volume of pass attempts in that offense, Juju is paid for or set up for a good fantasy year this season. At number 6, well, we almost didn't have him at number 6, but Tyreek Hill, the news that he avoided suspension shoots him right back up into our fantasy top 10 at wide receiver. Hey, last year he was electric. And the thing about Tyreek Hill is he has some of that T.Y. Hilton element of high weekly ceiling, low weekly floor. but any given week he could be the number one. In fact, he was multiple times last season the number one fantasy wide receiver. And what I like about him is he's not just a big play guy. I mean, he had 87 catches last year, so he can see some volume in that offense in addition to just having any play, take it to the house ability. So Tyreek Hill coming in at number 6. At number 5, a change of scenery for Odell Beckham Jr. Now in a Cleveland Browns uniform with Baker Mayfield coming off of last year's performance. Baker showed he could spin. It showed us why he won that Heisman Trophy. And now he gets one of the better receivers in the league to throw the ball to. This is very good for Odell Beckham Jr. because there are a lot of instances where, hey, he had to adjust to Eli Manning passes. He made spectacular plays. He's not going to have to adjust to many balls from Baker Mayfield. And certainly, there's a lot of upside there. The one concern, that may keep him out of, like, say, the top 3 for me is that Jarvis Landry is there and he's still going to see a big chunk of the target. So, you have to keep that in mind. But Odell Beckham Jr. is still going to be a stud in that offense. At number 4, speaking of stud, he had 125 catches last year. Michael Thomas, and that performance among, his entire professional career, the performances that he's had, got him paid. We know he's now a $20 million a year wideout. So congrats to Michael Thomas, and we love him for fantasy purposes. The one knock on him that I have, if there is one, and this is splitting hairs, is that he doesn't get targeted particularly heavily downfield. He's getting targeted very close to the line of scrimmage. In fact, it was 7.9 yards downfield last year. Typically for, your front-end elite fantasy receivers, you'd love to see that number close to like 12.5 or 13 yards downfield. It wasn't the case for Michael Thomas. So a slight knock, but hey, the volume is going to be there, and he has almost no competition for targets in the New Orleans offense. At number 3, Julio Jones. Another guy like Mike Evans, and for some reason people love to hate on him for fantasy purposes, but Julio Jones is very good at football. In fact, one of the most efficient receivers that we've ever seen at Pro Football Focus on a per route basis. Touchdowns can sometimes be overrated. I know that we value them at 6 points in fantasy football, but touchdowns are a little bit fluky at times or tough to predict on a micro basis. It's much easier to predict yardage. It's much easier to predict targets. Touchdowns can fluctuate. And everybody complaining about Julio Jones' touchdown production. I mean, he had 8 touchdowns last year, so it was still a rock-solid number. But that creates a little bit of a negative mindset for some people. Let it happen. Let Julio Jones fall in fantasy drafts and scoop him up in the second round if you can get him. He's my number 3 receiver this year. At number 2, Davante Adams. I tell you what, no receiver in the NFL has scored more touchdowns over the last 3 seasons. Yet again, another double-digit touchdown season last year. Now, the knock I had on him coming into last year was the volume wasn't there. He wasn't a guy who you'd expect to catch triple-digit receptions, right? To go up over 100 receptions. He wasn't a guy who actually had a 1,000-yard season heading into last year. So despite the touchdown productivity, the yardage wasn't there to match. Well, now it is. He's coming off a triple-digit catch season, enormous yards last year. Aaron Rodgers' favorite target. And Aaron Rodgers said, I want to throw this guy the ball more. So giddy up. Let's get another catch a game. Let's get him up there into the Michael Thomas range. But absolutely, the ceiling-floor combination with Davante Adams puts him right up in the elite territory. And in fact, with my wide receiver tiers, I only have 2 guys in that top tier. So it is Davante Adams at number 2, and at number 1, it's the guy, DeAndre Hopkins. He's been a number 1 fantasy wideout in each of the last 2 years. Remember 3 seasons ago when he was a big fantasy disappointment? Well, that's in the rearview mirror now, especially with Deshaun Watson in place. His presence on the field really gives Hopkins that fantasy juice that we want. We know that he's going to be a heavy volume receiver, even with Will Fuller there, even with Kiki QT there. You say 10 targets per game is certainly a fair estimate for DeAndre Hopkins. He's a guy who could easily top double-digit touchdowns, triple-digit catches, be up in the 1,500 yard range very easily. All of that's super high floor, that super high ceiling makes DeAndre Hopkins the number 1 fantasy wideout for 2019 fantasy football drafts. You want to see the rest of the wide receiver rankings and all of our rankings, you can check those out and more at PFF.com.